Welcome, fam, to the Week 16 recap. This is the semifinals and the consolation winner recap, as well as a full league recap. Today, I have a special guest that you've seen before. What is your name, young sir?
My name is Sam.
And luckily, we are recording live from Sam's room.
Yup. quite
So
quite the shock when I hopped on the Zoom and I'm like, that is my bedroom.
so I'm staying. Obviously, we stayed the night with your parents last night to do Christmas and all of that fun stuff. And I just took the opportunity to then say, "Hey, if Sam's going to be on the podcast, it'd be great to record in his room, the bedroom that you grew up in."
Yep.
So I'm by a bunch of your wall. I'm gonna say you've got some other stuff on the wall over here, but this stuff seems to be the most impactful. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna point to something on this wall, and you're gonna tell me what it is. Okay,
All right.
so what is that?
That will be an all-conference award for lacrosse in high school.
Okay, high school lacrosse all conference. Way to go! What about this one?
I believe that's another all-conference for high school, sophomore and senior year.
What happened to junior year?
I don't know. We weren't very good.
You suck.
Yeah, it was just
What about right above me? What's that one?
that was perfect attendance in high school. I was a bit of a nerd.
Which is amazing. I think you were an all around like good student. I mean, you were an athlete because you didn't just play lacrosse.
I played soccer too. Yeah, took after Allison. So all the awards up there, it was Allison went through high school and kind of left her mark, and I had to step up a little bit more. Her academic career a little disappointing, athletic a little disappointing. So
Did she get perfect attendance in high school?
I don't see an award on her wall, so I'm not sure, but there might be one. Who knows?
That's awesome. What's this one?
I think that's just an academic award. I snuck my way into the top of the class somehow with everybody in the weighted GPAs. So
Okay. What about these
and the
guys?
black ones are from college. So those are my all conference for lacrosse in college.
Nice. So all around athlete. What about this guy way up here?
That
What's that
one,
guy?
I don't know why that's still up there. I had a brief stint playing baseball when I was younger. I actually played for a while. And then the funny thing about that is I used to get so scared when they started switching to actual kids pitching. And that's why I didn't like playing it anymore because I was so afraid to stand in the box when people were pitching. And then I switched to a sport where the ball is harder and it comes at you just as fast and you get
Yeah.
hit with it. But for some reason, that was more comfortable.
And like in my opinion, not as controlled because it's on in a basket that somebody is trying to like flip out of the basket. Like, and
Yeah.
I've seen some of the welts, so that actually surprises me, Sam, because knowing
Yeah.
you, like you're a tough guy, and like that's just kind of funny.
I don't know, whatever it was, I just couldn't like I must have been wherever I was standing. And playing softball and baseball your whole life, like when you're standing in there, you just feel like you're not safe. Like I don't know, I felt that way. You
Sure.
couldn't move out of the box, and then that just did it for me. I got done, I think eighth grade was like my last year.
Yeah, it's funny for me in baseball. I was a gritty player. I loved getting hit. Like to me, it charged me up. And I actually had a game. I remember this vividly. I was pitching in the game, so I was the pitcher. It was a summer league game, and me and the other pitcher both hit each other twice. Like we were both threw at each at each other, and it just got us both charged up, and like we're like jawing at each other and yelling at
Oh
each other.
man.
I want to say it was like a sophomore in high school, or it was after my sophomore year, or something like that. But yeah, I won't forget that game. That was just we were. He was a big kid too. I could not. I wasn't really a hard thrower, and so
Yeah.
it's so funny when my coach would tell me to hit players. Like I was not good at it because I'm not a hard thrower,
No.
and I'd rather strike you out than hit you. But that one was a different scenario where him and I were going at it. That was kind of funny. But I like getting hit because to me it was like my goal was to get on base. So if you're going to hit me, I'll just take it. So I was the guy that just turned, like let it hit me in the back, and let's get our base.
Yeah.
That's our goal.
Softball's a different story. I like doing it when we played like beer league softball for a year, but baseball, I don't know what it was. I just couldn't
Yeah.
stand in there.
Well, softball, the ball's also coming in like,
Yeah,
like you're not
I
worried
felt
about it.
safer.
Softball, the only spot, and it's funny, it's my favorite spot too, is third base. Like that's the one that you worry about because some of these guys just fucking stroke it.
Oh yeah.
Especially in like tournament ball. I play a lot of tournament ball, and when you get in some of these like bigger leagues and such, like it gets to be scary over there. But I like it because it's reaction based position, third base. So when you're getting a ball, especially with these bats nowadays, these softball bats are insane. Like they just jump off the bat. But to me, it's you've got one step left or one step right. You don't really have much time. And I
Yeah.
was, and for me, I was not good at the basic play. Like no matter what, I could make the great play. But the basic play, which is what pros do, I couldn't do that. Like I was like, it was like, oh, it's too easy. I can't do that
Can't
because
do
I
that.
gotta think.
Right through the
Uh,
legs.
yeah, exactly. So, but that's not why we're here on this podcast. We're here to talk about the foosball. So let's get right into it. We're going to start with our ass whooping of the week. And by golly gee, was it an ass whooping? The actual high score this week, and I'm sorry, Bob, you get no money for it because we just went through week 14. Maybe we can put that in the changes for next year. But Bob scored like 151 points
Yeah.
against Louis, and Louis shit the bed with the 82. So in my calculations, that's just shy of 70-point whomping on
Yeah.
him. I don't know if there's anything you noted about either side on that as to why that, that actually
I
occurred.
mean, it's crazy because you look at like Tua had not a great game and Stephon Diggs had not a great game. Like I think ESPN posted a thing. A lot of the big name guys didn't have like big fantasy weeks, but everybody else picked up the slack there. I mean, Akers goes
Almost
for
40 points.
yeah, and then like Eckler last night to top it off gets the two. They were talking about that on the broadcast. Like they don't have a run game, but when you get by right by the red zone, he can just run in your touchdowns. So
Yeah.
I'm the perfect fantasy player. So he had like a bunch of guys just absolutely go off.
Yeah.
And,
Well, that's what I noted. It was the same thing of it's funny for Bob, it was feast or famine for his guys in
yeah,
general. They either went off for 25 plus. I think he had like four players that went for 25 plus or around there, or they didn't do hardly anything. So it
yeah,
was a very, very odd way to victory. But man, he got 151 points. It's a lot to score. So kudos to you, Bob. And then for Louis, it was just kind of poor all around. It just didn't really turn around for him. So that was kind of unfortunate on that side. And he benched Deonta Foreman, understandably so, because Foreman sucked last week. I think Foreman only got like under 5 points last week or something. So you don't feel confident in him. And I think
yeah,
he went off for like
2.2
30.
2.9 last week.
Yeah. And then
Goes
this
for
week,
20, and then he goes for 27 this week.
yeah. So like that's a tough one. But I think that was a general thing for a lot of fantasy players, not just our league, obviously, but everywhere. Of do you trust Deontay Foreman when I think last week Chuba Hubbard stole the show last week, and Chuba's been getting more and more run and looking good too. Like I mean,
Yeah.
he's looked good. So, but that was the ass whooping this week. And then the rest, we actually had some pretty good close battles. So Tyler eked out Kyle. I think it was like 91 points to 77 on that one. And in that one, I felt bad for Kyle because hey there. Oh, okay. Here's one of the
Special
Christmas gifts.
special guest appearance.
Special guest. What's your name?
Tage.
What's your full name? Do you know it?
Mm-mm.
Tage Lee Stevens. Right? Yeah,
You
Tage
gotta,
Lee.
you gotta introduce the dog.
What's the name of this dog?
Um, bubblegum.
Bubblegum. Yeah. Bubblegum's pretty talkative when it moves. Yeah, right?
Mm-hmm.
When did you get bubblegum?
Hmm?
How'd you get bubblegum?
I'm her bubble gum?
When did you get bubble gum? Okay, you got bubble gum yesterday for Christmas, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. Now she become one of your favorite toys, walking it around.
Tage, I have a very important question for you.
What?
Are you going to be rooting for your mom or Uncle Sam next week?
Who do you want to win? Do you want Mama to win, or do you want Sam to win?
I want Sam to win.
All right.
Oh, don't tell Mama.
Extra presents coming your way.
That's true. We're already done with ours, so she knew the game to play there. So very
Yes.
nice.
Way to work the system, Tage. That's why you're my
Yeah.
favorite niece.
Well, thank you for
What?
joining us.
Oh,
What?
why are we gonna win?
Oh, well, your mom and Uncle Sam are facing off in the championship game of the playoffs.
Oh.
Yeah.
Da-na-na, da-na-na.
That lady right there. Yeah.
Show us your muscles.
Show us your muscles. Yeah.
Tage's face.
Yep. You don't even want to know what your daughter said. So.
So, Tage, what I need you to do is go on her phone and find a website that looks like this and drop all of her good players. I'll send you a list. Drop Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, all those players.
Sounds like collusion to me.
It does. No.
All right, come
What?
on, Tage, we're gonna have
Love you.
breakfast.
Love you. Thank you for joining. Say bye, Uncle
Bye,
Sam.
Tage.
I can Sam.
Oh, well, that was a nice little appearance. And then Allison will find out later when she watches this who her daughter is rooting for. Oh, man. But back to Tyler and Kyle's game after that nice break. So like I said, it was 91-77. And I said I felt bad for Kyle because DeAndre Hopkins is probably the thing that I felt the worst about for him.
Yeah.
I mean, what, he got one catch for like 7 yards on like 10 targets. It was something like he got 10 targets. What happens, you know?
And it's like almost like the announcer's curse because I was watching that game and they were talking about how he has like one catch in every game for like 170 consecutive or something like that. And then all of a sudden, like he had nothing going in, I think the second half. Like I must have either missed it early or he didn't get it till late, but
Yeah.
they weren't getting the ball to him at all.
No, I mean, that offense is rough right now in general. I mean, without Kyler Murray, you're already rough, but at least with Colt McCoy, they can move the ball a bit. He's one of the better backups, I think, in the NFL.
They had Trace McSorley, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So
And I was asking this, and maybe others will know, but is his father like Marty McSorley, the old hockey player that was like the goon for? He basically was the enforcer for like Gretzky and stuff.
I'm not sure, he might be.
Yeah, they were showing him, but that's the only. I'm pretty sure that guy's name was Marty McSorley. He was one of the best enforcers in the NHL back in like the '80s. And just for some of you, I'm not a big hockey person,
Yeah.
but for some of you who don't know, usually when you have some of these more Gretzky style players, Patrick Kane style players, who aren't physical, but they're like your dominant scorer. You usually got to have a guy out there who is going to protect that person because oftentimes others are going after that person. So that was Marty McSorley back in the day for like Gretzky and some others, and so that's where I was curious because they were showing the guy on TV at one point, and I didn't have the sound on, so I don't know who they were talking about, but he looked like he could have been a hockey player. He looked pretty tough. So, but yeah, I felt bad mostly for that. Like I literally felt bad for Kyle because I'm like, he got 0 from Gerald Everett yesterday.
Yeah.
And it was like, did Everett even play? But that was a rough game all around. Like that game sucked. So I don't really want to get into that one. But yeah, he got 0 points from his tight end, and then he gets like 1.2 from his number one wide receiver. And that just really, clipped him for that game because I think otherwise, with Tyler only scoring 91, Kyle's got a shot there. So
yeah, I think what hurts the most is Higbee sitting on the bench with a 26 piece.
Yeah, that hurts, but you're not playing him. Like I think it was something like the past 5 games, Higbee had like 8 catches.
Yeah.
the
Oh
past
yeah.
5 games. Like you're not playing Higby, you're playing Everett in that
Oh
moment.
yeah.
So he
100%. It's just a weird week.
yeah, with the weather the way it was, like I think people made the right decisions on their roster. From literally what I was checking, I'm like there was maybe only a couple where you might, or maybe even one that I questioned, and it wasn't even like the person had a great option otherwise. But we'll get into that here shortly. But I do want to give a shout out to because one of the things that we talk about is everybody being active and engaged this whole time, and a big shout out to the 2 games we just mentioned, because I felt like all the teams were still in it. They're still looking to win. You're still trying to like play the right plays. And I appreciate that as a commissioner of a league and as just a league mate, because it makes your league better when everybody is still focused and still paying attention to what's going on. And it makes you better in the end because you are trying to ultimately, for even though you're not playing for this year, for next year, figure out your decision making process and how do you make decisions when it comes to that. So big shout out to you all.
Yeah. And I think this is kind of jumping a different subject, but like on the same of that, like being active in the waiver wire, like going to pick guys up, because it was like, with a couple guys not being in the playoffs anymore, but picking up guys, you got to be like, okay, like who can I pick up now? So then you do more research and you be like, oh, okay, well, like this guy might have a good matchup, or okay, let's see who's getting the carries, what defense is terrible against the run. Maybe this guy will go off. So like just being more and more active if you're newer to fantasy football, like just looking up, researching some of these guys. Okay, he doesn't have a whole lot of points, but maybe it's a good offense, or this person got injured, not getting that many touches. You just end up like learning more things along the line. So, kudos to everybody for, still making waiver pickups and like setting the lineups, all that fun stuff.
And that's a good point. Yeah, that's true. Like you're kind of paying attention to, as you mentioned, like, yeah, he normally is not a top option, but their top 2 options are out. And so now he becomes, potentially a top play. So that, because Allison was actually talking through that with her tight end decision this week. She played Komet over Dulcich, which didn't work out in the end. I mean, she still won, but she was actually making that decision because she saw that Chase Claypool was out and Mooney was already out, has already been out. So at that point, your top 2 wide receivers are gone. She looked at it like Cole Kmet should then get more passes. Like that's, to me, I loved hearing that from her because that was a great way to think through that process of the
Yeah.
top 2 pass catchers are out. Komet is as their top tight end and should be then get more passes. Tough game just because of the weather, but
Yeah.
it made sense. So you're right about that as well. So nice job to you all for continuing that on. And good W's by Tyler. Help him get a W back on his record there. Just so you're aware, if you don't see your record change, it's because it does stop at the regular season. But hopefully that helps you get refueled. Like, no, okay, I got to win again. Which for Tyler, it felt like it was forever to not get one. But now let's get into some of the other games. We really truly had 3 nail biters for all the games that were impactful for making getting some sort of dollars here at the end of the season. So we'll go into the consolation final, I'll say. And I ended up taking it at 146 to 139.5. I mean, that was a really close battle. And, you know, for me, when TJ Hawkinson was going off, I was just, I mean, it was rough because at one point the projection was like they were going to hit 150 something, and I was at 111. Like at one point after that,
Yeah.
after Hawkinson was going off, and during the early games on Saturday, that's kind of where it was lying. And man, I was stressing. Man, I was like, "Fucking a, he's gonna whoop my ass again. I'm gonna lose 3 in a row to
3 in a
some
row.
AC. It was gonna be brutal at that point." But yeah, but you know what? My tight end wanted to try to match his, and that was awesome to see of Kittle
Yeah.
and Hawkinson going off. But it was a good matchup. Anything that you noted from that matchup?
I mean, again, just kind of going with the weird week. Like, Josh Jacobs has been just an absolute wagon, like getting almost a 50 piece one point this season. And then in a game where you're thinking, okay, it's cold in Pittsburgh, it's like a night game, they're going to be just pounding the rock. And he didn't really get much. But then, looking at your scores and stuff, it was almost like everybody matched up right across because then DeAndre Swift didn't have a great game. But then like, CeeDee Lamb goes for 30, Connor goes for 25. So it was just an overall like you had some guys that were not doing well, but then other people picked up the slack. So it was one of the real close ones going into the last day on Sunday.
Well, and that was funny because Swift he's always my question mark every week. And I battle between putting in a running back who I think should get carries and, I think that's helpful in our league versus and it was between him and T. Higgins, but Higgins had, really like hadn't performed well and has been injured. And it was tough to say, what does that look like? And so when Higgins went off, I was besides myself because I was like, fuck, of course I make the wrong decision again of who to go for. And that was when I was projected to lose by, 40 points. And I'm thinking like, I'm going to fucking lose because I didn't play T. Higgins. Like that's going to be why I end up going down. Obviously I ended up taking it in the end, which is I other players stepped up, but you're right. It was like big, just uppercut blows one way or the other from both of us, those are the games I like to be a part of.
Yeah.
I'd rather lose going down fighting like that, right? Like, well, it's tough when you score that much because technically, Casey, I think they scored the third highest total of the week because Bob had the highest total of 151. I was second and they were third. So it gets tough when you're like, fuck, I had the third highest point total and I lost. But I'd rather lose that way than some of the other games we're getting ready to talk about. But kudos to you, Casey, for putting up some good totals. I thought you had a good team this year and they scored well. Didn't come out in the very end, but fought all the way. So kudos to you. And hey, I made my money back in the league by winning 2 high weeks and getting $30. So my $50 comeback.
There you go.
But now we're going to get into the 2 semifinal games, and this is kind of where I talk about, especially we'll get to your game second. So I'd like to talk about Allison and Andy's game first, because they were going into last night's game within 3 points. So Allison was up 3 points, feeling pretty good with Herbert going against Pittman, and quarterbacks usually score more than the receivers, and feeling pretty good about it. What happened?
Oh, man. I mean, you look at Herbert scoring 8.5 and Pittman 5.9. Like that's,
those are the things that make you sick. Like that makes you sick.
And it's funny because they were talking about that at the post game yesterday. Scott Van Pelt was talking to Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. And I think SVP made a comment like, oh, you'd like to see Herbert like have one of those like 3-4 touchdown games. And Troy Aikman was like, they put a lot of stock into the fantasy stuff. He's like, I just want a quarterback that can win you the game. Like, drive down the field, whatever your running back gets in. So, of course, for them, they just want to see guys that get it. For us, we want to see, touchdowns. We want players to go for 3-4. You're on the 1 yard line. Screw it. Throw a slant, run the ball in yourself. But
yeah, I know that was actually an interesting sequence because was that the Keenan Allen where he stepped out and then he almost had a touchdown? Because you almost had the game won by halftime because of that play. Like it was really close.
The weird flea flicker almost. It was like the lateral, and he snuck it in there. Yeah,
that was a cool play. But yeah, and then Justin Herbert does do a QB sneak, but it's on the 3 just to get the first down.
Yeah.
To then have Eckler run it in from like the 1.5 line.
Yep.
At that point. So yeah, all the touchdowns got vultured as they say, but he's kind of right. I mean, in my opinion, besides the interception, Herbert looks good. I mean, he's doing what he should do.
Yeah,
I would say. And man, he throws that dude's got an arm. Like,
I
feel like I haven't watched him play much, but it just felt like that ball comes out.
Well, and he had the one where the lineman was coming at him with the hands up, and he just sidearmed it underneath. And they're like, the old meme, if that's Patrick Mahomes, ESPN goes crazy for like 3 days about it. But
yeah,
he just kind of flies under the radar because that's just the way he is. Like he's a solid quarterback. So I'd love to have him on the Bears. I'm sure most of the Colts fans would love to have him on the Colts.
Fuck yeah, man.
It's just one of those days where he just doesn't put up the touchdowns, and that's where you're like, he still had 237 yards of offense.
Yeah, so they didn't need to do much. I think that was the other tough part is what people don't realize in that game, or as you're thinking of it, is there's more short fields. There were, shooting the first part of that game looked awful because it was like 3 and outs and interceptions, and it just wasn't going great at that point. But yeah, he looked good, but he's been disappointing for fantasy this year, for
Yeah.
like where you drafted him. I think when I looked, because I was trying to look for the upcoming matchups, which we'll get into, but I was looking at him. He was like QB 11 on the year, which
Yeah.
you drafted him as QB 4. So you're looking to him be a top 5 guy, and he had potential. A lot of that's his injuries to his wide receiving core throughout the year. It's rare that he had his full complement, which he finally does. But that's a good offense. They're going to be good. They didn't have to do too much against Indy. That fucking sucks. God, the Colts are awful. But yeah, that was a rough one. But yeah, that was an interesting matchup. And actually, the only other thing I'll get into in that game is the Pittman decision, because I had to go through this myself, and I almost played in my league, my other league that I had them, and I was rooting for Herbert and Pittman. I needed them to go for the 36, like I said, and they both shit the bed. But I really was debating benching Pittman for George Pickens in my other league, because that's the only other player I had in a
Yeah.
game I thought something could happen decent. Otherwise, I had terrible options. I'm in the playoffs, so I like my bench had Jordan Mason and Matt Breida, who were one of the backups for the running backs that I had, and I had J.K. Dobbins this week, which he didn't do well this week. So but he was doing well, so I played him. But for Andy, I thought the same. I'm like, okay, Pittman's a tough call because Nick Foles,
Yeah.
who hasn't played at all, but I don't know who else he'd play. Looking at his bench, hindsight's a 2020 thing. But I can't say you'd have to have some real cojones to play James Cook over Michael Pittman, I think.
Oh yeah. Like it's one of those things where it's like you can talk yourself into just a million different scenarios, and that's where fantasy is sometimes so fun and so frustrating, because when you get it right you feel like the smartest person in the world, but then if you get it wrong you're like, what the fuck was I thinking? Like, you can look at all this stuff, like, even talking about quarterbacks, Allison, with Justin Herbert or Jared Goff, it's like, yeah, Goff has been playing well, but then you look at like matchups, you're like, okay, like Herbert, you're indoors, you don't have to deal with any of the
Yep.
weather. Like,
Yep.
Okay, he's been playing well. Like, yeah, last week he didn't have a great game, but he's had good games in the past. Like, you just never know, especially with her backup being I think it's Jared Goff. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, is it going to be a game where they're running the ball a whole lot, or is it like, is he going to go for touchdowns? So, that's probably the most frustrating part about fantasy, is like you can look online and see 7 different opinions and they're all different. Like, well, start this guy. This guy's going to have a boom week, and then at the end of the day, it's just, half the time it's just all luck. Who gets in the right spot at the right time. And
Yeah. It's part of the reason that we don't play kickers, because I feel like that's a very much a luck based position. I shouldn't say that. I mean, there are obviously better kickers than others, but you can get in game scripts that all of a sudden the kickers kind of won you the game. It's like, I don't want like, I know it's part of football, but it's like in
yeah,
fantasy football, it's just a different game. But you're right. Like, you can pick apart those decisions, but hopefully you have a process in place, and that's what you're working through. And that's why we talked about those who weren't in the playoffs still, but we're still making, lineup decisions and playing to win the game. And that's a part of the process, is actually learning that process side and going through it in your head. But ultimately, Allison came through with the victory. And but that's kind of where I talk about, like, both players sucked, and you kind of feel gross winning that game. You kind of feel gross, like, ugh, like, okay, I won, so you're happy. But for Allison's side, on Andy's side, you're like sick to your stomach because Pittman fucking sucked and the Colts sucked, and like you just feel awful about it. But you're right, it's just tough to, you can nitpick yourself all day long on that.
yeah. I mean, the door was definitely open there too, with Adams and Stevenson not doing well, but it's just like, sometimes the chips just don't fall where you want them. Like, a lot of players, like they picked up the slack in other places, kind of like some of the other games, but it's just,
Yep.
that's what you want in the semis, though. You want the nail biters.
Yeah, correct. And then we have one final one, which is you and Zach. Tell me a little bit about your side of it, because you were going into last night down 12, but you needed 12, I think,
Yeah,
to
I
take
was
it.
I was thinking about it last night. I was so nervous. And I think it's because, like, right around this time of year when college isn't as prevalent, they move games around. So it's like Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, when normally you have that like big chunk on Sunday where you kind of know where everything's lying. But like
Yeah.
I remember sitting there on Christmas and we have the Dolphins Packers game on. So it was going into Sunday. We were still like pretty close. He had Lazard and Judy left. I had Broncos D and Keenan Allen. And so I'm sitting there watching the game, and it's just like now I know exactly there's just one game on. Like I know exactly what player I don't want to get the ball. But it's like right here, you get so nervous this time of year because the games are so spread out. So each game, each player seems so much more significant. And then even last night, like I knew Keenan Allen had like he could go for a good game, but then you posted something like, "Oh, like I'm no expert, but it looks like Sam's gonna win." And I'm sitting there like I'm still like 0.7 points behind. Like, what happens if he comes out of the locker room and he's hurt or something like
Yeah.
that? Like, the one play yesterday where that Chargers corner came down and popped that I don't
Ashton
know who it was.
Doolin. Yeah, he hit
Yeah,
Ashton Doolin.
and he goes out for like concussion protocol. I don't think he ever came back in, but I was like, it just takes like one slightly poorly thrown ball for his night to be over. And then I'm
Yeah.
sitting there like I just lost by 0.7. So it's definitely you get a little nervous when you're not going in with a sound lead. But luckily for me, he was able to pull it off.
Yeah, and for you, obviously getting negative points from your defense, from a defense that has been absolutely stellar all year against an offense that's a Baker Mayfield led offense. And I actually am on the side that I think Baker Mayfield, if he was a backup quarterback, would be the number one backup quarterback in the league. So I do feel like he should be a starting quarterback somewhere because there's always going to be a quarterback that's worse. To me, there's always a starting quarterback that's worse than the best backup quarterback in the league. So I don't think he's a terrible player, but he does make bad decisions at times. And the Rams aren't a great team right now with poor weapons. And so you're thinking like you got like for them to get that many points, -4, it did feel very, very much like a fuck you to the coach I thought it was a kind of a fuck you to Russell Wilson from the from the Broncos D.
And so we were at my girlfriend's parents for Christmas, and I made the mistake of telling my girlfriend's dad that I had the Broncos D. And so like I saw it was like 3-0 or something. It looked like the game was going slow. I'm like, all right, sweet, just run the ball, get out of this game. And then like he comes up to me like 3 minutes later and he was like, it's 17-0 or 17-3. And I was like, what happened? And he's like, oh, Russ threw an interception and they had this and that. And then for the rest of the time until we left, he was just came up to me every time the Rams scored, and I was just like, "This is my nightmare." Like we left probably midway through the third, and I didn't have very good service, so I couldn't check it. But I was just like, I'm so afraid to open the app and see how badly, because it was like they started at 10, and then it was like in the second they had like 5 points, and then it dropped to 4, and I was like, this could go incredibly wrong, and that's going to be the decision. But that's fantasy football. Like you look at a team that's 18 points per game each time, probably an interception. Like they keep touting that defense is good, and then going -4 points. So you never know.
Yeah, that was very, very weird. You're right about that. And then, I know that Zach didn't feel comfortable with how it ended because, he even made the point that Keenan Allen has scored at least 12 points every game. Like, and that's one of the things that Keenan Allen does is he gets a lot of targets from Justin Herbert Keenan Allen's Justin Herbert's number one target. So he's going to throw him the ball. He's not a big touchdown guy, but so he's a little bit more valuable in like a full PPR format. But even in our format, like he's the definition of that super solid, like consistent floor player that you're expecting 15 points every week. And if you get 15 points every week, you're loving that in our league. Like I'd take that from a wide receiver all day, from us. And that's what he's going to do. He's going to rarely ever going to get you that 30-point game.
Yeah.
But man, like that's the guy that you think of a lot for that consistency piece. And ultimately, you pulled it out one by 5. So you got the W.
Yeah.
And now it leads into a championship between a brother and sister. So it's pretty cool that gets to happen and somebody gets to own the smack talk for a while. That's what it seems.
And I think that's that's the fun part about fantasy is just like, I've been playing for 5, 6 years, this is Allison's first year. So it's
Yeah.
like, you got the tale of both sides to just show that like, anyone can make it. And again, like, you look at the matchups between the semifinalists this week, it's like if you play that game again next week, with less weather conditions, different matchups, like the whole tale could be flipped. In my
Yep.
other league, our commissioner messed up and he actually made the semifinals 2 weeks. And they were talking about it in our group chat, and the other semifinalists that were losing were like, well, it's not fair to us to just switch it because we thought it was 2 weeks. And the championship match completely flipped. So the other guys just absolutely balled out. And so now the two guys that were up front after last week, they now lost. So it's like one of those things where it's like, again, you just never know week to week. Like sometimes you just got to get lucky in
Yeah.
fantasy football.
And I've played in leagues like that where it's 2 week, like when you get the semifinals and the finals are 2 weeks each. And I'm never a big fan of it because, and we'll touch base on it here, or I guess we can do it now. But as you get close to the end of the year, there are teams in the NFL that don't need to play their players because they've already secured their spot, or they're not going to get a better spot in the playoffs, but they've secured it. So then they rest players, or that player plays, but they play like the half, or they just don't get as much run. It's just more to keep them into the football mode, but
Yeah.
I don't want to get this person hurt. So, instead of running their normal 20 times, I'm going to give them 8 to 10 carries. Well, that impacts, your decision. And that's kind of tough when you've done so well with this player this whole time. They're a reason that you are where you are. And then they're just kind of like out. And I know that their injuries happen, but that's more of the part of the game than when we get to it. So that's always why the playoffs for fantasy football start a little bit earlier because we don't go into playoffs of NFL, but also why we end before the last week of the season because that's definitely a time where you'll see a lot more teams, bench players or not play somebody. So yeah, so I've never really been a fan of that 2 week per kind of style, but we did have some great games. It was really nail biters across the board for the consolation bracket, the semifinals. That was really cool to see. So really awesome fantasy football that happened this week. And now we'll get into some injuries. I only notated one. I wanted to throw out Tua having his injury, and I only notate that because that means they'll probably have their backup quarterback Teddy Bridgewater play. They're the quarterbacks for the Miami Dolphins, and because we have a couple matchups left, Allison has Jalen Waddle, who's a wide receiver for the Dolphins. Do you feel like the switch from Tua to Teddy is a big deal for the Dolphins offense?
I mean, after the way that Tua played last week, maybe not, but I mean, at least the backup is somebody who's been around and been seasoned enough. Teddy Two Gloves has been, he was supposed to be the guy in Minnesota until his knee got blown out. So,
Yep.
I mean, I think I wouldn't feel as bad just because I know he's like been in that system. It's one of those things where it's like, when they pull Nick Foles in or like Baker Mayfield, it's like guys that don't really have a whole lot to know about the offense and stuff. But at least it's a guy that's been around the whole year. So that's one of the things that I would look at. But
yeah, I don't think it's a major change. He played well. I mean, he played this year, and I think they played well with him.
Yeah,
I recall earlier on in the season. So I don't think it's that major of a change. So I don't think you're really adjusting your wide receivers, for that. Any
and
others that you? Oh, go ahead.
Especially too with like, it always depends on the wide receiver. Like Waddle's one of those guys that can like go for more, right? If you're looking at a guy that's maybe just like a check down receiver, maybe he's like a wide receiver 3 and your quarterback gets hurt, then maybe like, okay, he's not going to get as many touches because, the game plan's still going to be get the ball to your heavy hitters, get it to Tyreek Hill, get it to Jalen Waddle, as opposed to like, if you're thinking about a flex position with like the wide receiver 3, you're like, okay, maybe he won't hit that guy as much. Or
sure.
Like, this might not be there as much, but guys like playmakers like Waddle and Hill, like they're so fast and shifty, like they can find pockets. And, Teddy's a guy that I think can hit, those passes.
Yep. Yeah, he's good. He's one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league as well. So I think that you're not missing much. Any other injuries that you like notated for the week that might impact some stuff?
Not really too many injuries. I think there's a lot of people kind of coming back. So I think that's like an interesting dynamic. Like, Chargers defense are supposed to maybe get Joey Bosa back, and
Yeah.
like other guys like defensive wise are coming back. So that kind of plays a little bit in terms of, who they're going to play against or just defenses. But
Yeah.
the other one was just was it Lane Johnson for the Eagles got hurt, and then Jalen Hurts is still kind of like a game time decision. I think it depends
Yeah.
on how things shake up in that, because they obviously want to lock up the 1 seed, which I don't think they have yet.
No, they don't. They did not because they lost.
Yeah.
So they did not secure that number one seed in the playoffs. So they still have something to play for because you're trying to play for a bye at
Right.
that point.
So
Yeah, the only other one I noted was Leo Collins for the Bengals, and I make note of that. He's offensive lineman for the Bengals. I only make note of it because earlier on in the year, that was actually the struggle for the Bengals was their offensive line. But as they've played together, they've gotten better, and you're noticing that the Bengals have gotten better. Like the Bengals are now a force to be reckoned with, and I think they were. Everyone thought that way at the beginning of the year, but because of how poorly their offensive line was playing, it raised some question marks, but he's one that he actually came over. I believe he was played for the Cowboys. He was a really good lineman for the Cowboys. Great offensive line. Came over this year to Cincy, but now he's out with a torn ACL, MCL. He's out. He's done for a while. I mean, that means he's done. Like, don't even expect him to do much next year with their
right.
offensive line either. So. Just something to think about as you move forward, but that's one thing that might impact. You have Jamar Chase. I don't know if it impacts it a ton. Again, he's a playmaker. Joe Burrow's a playmaker, so you're not as concerned. But for and maybe it helps because maybe their running game won't be as great because he's out, and so they're going to rely more on the pass. Who knows? But that's another one that I notated. And you had mentioned some guys coming back from injury, and I think that actually leads right into kind of us talking a little bit about waivers. I originally wasn't going to, but I think we have some key guys that are actually I looked at on our free agency pool that are coming back from injury, like Debo Samuel could potentially come back from his
Yeah.
injury this week. That would be early. I don't know if he does, but I mean that's a big time player who has boom potential, who is on there. Tyler Lockett,
Right.
you know, top receiver for the Seattle Seahawks. He's in our free agency pool. He actually had a broken finger that was surgically repaired, was
Yeah.
out this week, but he potentially could come back next week as well. So those are two guys at the top receiver wise that, for the teams that are still in it and for those of you who want to continue on to see how well you're doing, those are guys that you could look at to pick up.
Yeah, even Darren Waller, tight end, is like, because he came back from a hamstring. They were saying, hamstrings, they typically kind of ramp them up a little bit, but like, I mean, last year he was an absolute force.
Yeah.
And so he's one of those guys where it's like, a lot of times with the tight end position, I know you guys have talked about this before, unless you have like the top 1, 2, 3,
Yeah,
Kittle,
unless you have George Kittle, unless you
yeah,
traded Tyler Algier for George Kittle and really helped your offense.
yeah, unless you got Kittle or Kelsey, like you're just looking for a tight end to maybe snag you a touchdown. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think Waller is one of those guys that could, now that he's kind of full blown. I know he was like a top 5 tight end going into the year before he got
Yep.
hurt. So,
Yep.
he's a guy coming back from injury that might be able to make a difference. So,
Yeah, I agree with that. And the other person I would note on in the free agency pool is Jeff Wilson. So if you're looking for a running back, Jeff Wilson is actually out there and healthy. And I think as he gets healthier, they're going to be using him more. And Miami is in the hunt. I mean, they're needing to win games. And with Tua out and Teddy going in, that could mean more running.
yeah,
That could be the case. You don't know, but Jeff Wilson would be another good pickup if you're looking for a running back. Even Chuba Hubbard is still out there, and he could be an option for somebody at the running back position. I won't go too deep into it because I know we're in the finals. I mean, we're in really the final time frame here, but just surprising when I looked, it was like, oh man, those are some big names that are out there. And you mentioned Waller as a tight end. That's another big time player that's out there if you're, coming in championship week or playing for that third place game and you need a tight end, might be somebody to look at. All right, now let's get into those matchups. So we still have, we're in the final week. We're going into it. We have our championship matchup between you and Allison. And then we have the battle for third place between who I'm gonna call a rivalry is going to be Andy and Zach. I think that's a good rivalry right there. And while they're not playing for a championship, they are still playing for third place. They're playing for a whopping $30 in our league, which hey, if
Yeah.
you're one of them, I think they've both won the high point of the week twice. So if you win this 30, you get your money back in our league, and now you've been able to enjoy the best league ever for free. That's what
Yeah.
that means. so,
That's
so
all you can shoot for. That's the floor every year is like, I just want to get my money back. If I can
yeah.
do that, I am completely happy. Good fantasy year.
Oh my God, I completely agree. I completely agree with that. If you can break even, you feel accomplished because you got to have some fun along the way. So,
Yeah.
so I agree with that. But let's start with the third place game. So we're going to start with that one. So that is Zach versus Andy in the upcoming matchup. And I don't know if there's anything that you noted within their current rosters or what they have that you think is kind of a key to the victory for either side.
I think it's just who's gonna ball out. It's just there's a lot of really good guys on both teams, like a
Yep.
lot of top talent. Like Christian McCaffrey can go for 30, 40 points. Justin Jefferson, we've seen, can go for almost 50 points. So it's just kind of like, you know, who's going to go off. And I think the best part about it is a lot of their players are still playing for something, right? So you
Yep.
got like Packers and the Vikings going against each other. So Jefferson, Cook, Lazard, like all those guys are still they're still trying to make the playoffs and get better seeding. So there's a lot of those guys that are still, gonna try to ball out. And other than that, I mean, it's just a good quarterback matchup,
Yeah.
Justin Fields and Patrick Mahomes. So,
Yeah.
both those guys can get you pretty good points. I think Justin Fields he's number 5, Patrick Mahomes is number 3. So it's like you got a really good quarterback matchup in that one as well.
Yeah, and two completely different style of quarterbacks, right? They're getting it done in opposite ways. And actually, Fields kind of hurt this because I don't think he really ran as much as you'd think he would have ran this past week. But I almost wonder if they're going to hold him back a little bit more from that just because they're not playing for anything right now. He needs to improve his throwing. I actually don't think he's a bad passer. I think he gets knocked a lot more for his passing than I feel he should. I feel
Yeah.
like he's actually had worse receiving core. People like I don't I'd love to look at the drops stats because I feel like he just has tons of drops on the year, from his players because he throws a really good deep ball. That's one of the
Yeah.
things that Fields is also good at is he throws a good deep ball. But yeah, that's an interesting matchup. And I think on Zach's side, I don't know that you do anything different. Like even this week, there really wasn't a big change. One of the things we didn't mention was, and Bob, I'm going to give you fucking heat for this, but you pick up two players and then you don't even play them. Like he benched him. Now it wasn't wrong. He scored 151 points. So Bob played his team well, and I think for Zach's side, I think it washed because if it was Zach, he was probably going to play Moss for Brian Robinson. Was my thought based on what I saw from his team because I don't
Yeah.
think you're playing him over any other player. And technically, Robinson scored 0.3 points more, so it was basically a wash there. So it wasn't like it would have helped him anyways. But I thought that was just a funny thing to note. But I only note it because I don't think that Zach changes his lineup. And if you look at his projection, he's still at like 140 points projection. I mean, that's Zach's team is pretty stacked,
Yeah.
starting wise. And I think, like he said, if he really risked depth by going after Cook and other players. And on Andy's side, I think you're questioning Pittman again. I think you're going through that process of do I bench Pittman for some of my other options? And you really got to look at matchups this week. And as you said, are they playing for something, this week?
Yeah.
Is that going to factor into it?
And you got to see who. I mean, they were talking on the broadcast last night at that last drive of the game. They were like, "Why is Nick Foles still in? Like, let Sam Ellinger just get in there, swing the ball around, and see." So again, it's one of those things where it's like they may come out and be like, "All right, Nick Foles didn't work. We're 4-10-1 now, 4-11-1. Like, do we just let Sam Ellinger throw it around, see if he's maybe our guy for the future or what?" So
Yeah, and Ellinger is a running quarterback. too, and so that. But even when Ellinger was in, I mean, Pittman still gets the targets. It's just not coming from good quarterback play,
Right.
which is the tough part. And I was saying that yesterday, anyways. This is what actually pissed me off about. Your dad asked me about Jeff Saturday and have I liked him as a coach, and I was like, no, I actually haven't. I think he's managed time poorly. He, also the whole QB thing that's gone on has kind of pissed me off because I look at it as that. What is the point of Nick Foles? Like, what is the point? Because he isn't taking us anywhere. We're not going anywhere but losing at this point. And to me, to your point, why would you not play your Sam Ellinger? What I think he's a second year player. I'm not saying he's the answer. I don't think he's the answer at all. But I think you have to find out, is he the backup? Is he a backup quarterback? Do we have a different offense when he's in? Can we run that offense? Think about Justin Fields. Justin Fields everyone thought he was a terrible quarterback until they decided to actually adjust the offense around his style. And holy shit, what a difference in the Bears offense since that moment. It's the Bears defense that's kind of fucking them in a sense, but it's whatever. I mean, but yeah, I've not been a fan of Saturday, and I think that is the call. Like, how do you not play Sam Ellinger in this moment when you have a garbage team right now? Like, why not just give the guy experience instead of Nick Foles, who even said, I think himself this week, like, I haven't even practiced. Like, I don't even think he was getting second team reps.
Like forever.
Yeah, and he wasn't even getting second team because Ellinger was getting second team stuff. So for Foles, he's kind of like, yeah, I guess I'm playing.
and that's again, like, you look at all that stuff, like you look at the Denver thing this week, like, were they just giving the fuck you to Hackett? Were they, doing it against Wilson? There's so much stuff in this that has to, like, you try to factor it all in. Like, was Jeff Saturday a hire to get, like, just as a fall guy? Are they actually trying to get Peyton Manning in some capacity to the Colts? Peyton Manning's got a pretty cush job right now doing Monday Night Football with his brother. They got, like, Lil Wayne goes on. They got, like, he's living a life. You got to work once a week, as opposed to doing something in the front office
from home.
Yeah. So, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that you don't know about. But yeah, I don't get what they're doing in Indy.
Yeah.
So.
But we'll digress on that one. But I don't want to get stuck.
We'll stop taking shots at the Colts.
Oh my God! Thank you. I appreciate it. But we do have the most important game of the year coming up, and that's between you and your sister Allison in this championship game coming up. Any thoughts on that matchup or anything that you've looked at?
I mean, it's a lot of guys that could just go off. Right. And so, I'm just happy this week. The bulk of it's on Sunday. So I'll know, kind of like, rip the Band-Aid off. We'll kind of know in full time, like, how it's looking. But I mean, it's, again, a little nervous just because, Herbert's got to play the Rams. And so it's like, okay, that could be a game where he could kind of go off and all that. And then, it's just anything can happen. That's the long and short of it.
But to me, I think you have a nice handcuff on her because you have Keenan Allen, Herbert's top target. And so for me, a lot of the stuff that would happen with Herbert's going to go through Keenan Allen. Yeah. So to me, that's actually a big thing, a big question mark for her. And Herbert hasn't played well. If you actually look at it, Goff is ahead of him on the year. As Goff is number 10 QB on the year.
Goff? Should she play Herbert? Lots of decisions to make.
I actually put that down, man. I put the QB change, there are, as going through many years of fantasy football, oftentimes a name carries weight just simply because they are this person. They carry weight. Look at Tom Brady. Yeah. Tom Brady, now I got off of him early this year. Nobody's really played him, but this is kind of the first year it really happened. But it took a while because you're still looking at it as, even 5-6 games into a shitty season. I think I was less than that, but either way, like, you're still looking at it as but it's Tom Brady, and he's got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Julio Jones, and but these names carry weight, but they really aren't performing to that, that potential. So QB change could be in the works. I think her other challenge is tight end, because Kmet, while the process was there, is not an offense that passes a lot. He doesn't get much yardage. He's not going for deep routes. So even the targets he is getting, he's not getting much yardage. And that actually is impactful in our league since it's a half PPR league. But Dulcich, who had actually a good game, he got hurt. So I don't even know if he's playing. So her other tight end that she could transfer to may not even play. So she might be in for a Waller, but she has Devontae Adams. So do you want to pair Waller and Adams together? Like these are decisions that you got to think through and look at. And for you, I put two things down. I put Derrick Henry. Do you know why I might put Derrick Henry down?
I literally just saw that he was listed as questionable.
That's not even why I have him down, man. So this is what they're talking about. So this week's game means nothing, which is the weird part. So this week's game doesn't mean anything to the Titans. Next week's game does. Because
against the Jags.
Correct, because that decides who actually wins the division, and therefore that's who gets into the playoffs. Because they're really not going to play well. So there's a thought process that do they rest Henry a bit? Do they give him fewer snaps, fewer carries, all that kind of stuff? Or someone pointed out, like, if you really are making a playoff push and Vrabel to me is not that kind of coach. Like, I don't think he's the coach to do that. And so if Tannehill is truly done and you're going with Malik Willis, you need him to get reps and you need this team to come into form by the playoff time. So do you just, even though this game doesn't matter win or lose for the Titans, do you still play the game?
Right.
Because, hey, we need to get our team ready for the playoffs, So that's a big question mark. The other one I put is Denver's D. They're playing Kansas City.
Oh yeah, no. I took them out last time. I'll take them out this time. I'm done with Denver's D for the year. That's it for me. I'm good.
Okay, I figured that. You got the Dolphins on your bench. I think they have a good matchup. Yeah. Did you pick up when did you pick up the Dolphins?
The last time Denver 2 weeks ago when Denver was playing Kansas City.
Okay. Yeah. I'm only asking because it's another thing to think through. This is just more throwing it out there for future reference for people. Like, especially when you get into the playoffs, while we don't like to look future forward, at times you do, especially if you're somebody that doesn't have a solid defense or a solid tight end and you keep rotating these, you kind of got to look a couple weeks out when you get to the playoffs to say, okay, well, if I do make it, if you have the extra spot to do it, because, like, I'm never going to play this player. Like, they're not playing in my, playoff lineup. Well, then you should then try to get maybe an upcoming defense where you're kind of getting a week ahead of those who are looking at it. So then you can pick up a Miami Dolphins defense versus, in a good matchup a week earlier than someone else who's trying to do the same thing. So
I think on the podcast that you had Bob on, you talked about, I think it was San Francisco's defense. Like the same goes for like in the middle of the season, you start to kind of like once your team comes into form as bye weeks start hitting, you do have to kind of at least take a glance at next week. So you're not sitting there and like, oh, shoot, I have 4 players on buys and you got to like move them to the bench and you have, so it's just one of those things, for a lot of the newer players, it's something to keep in the back of your head. Obviously, like you're saying, you always want to focus on like, who can you get for the best matchup that week? But, you always want to take a glance and be like, okay, I got a lot of guys going on buys or I have, somebody going up against the Chiefs, like let's get ahead of this early because chances are there's somebody else in the league who has the same problem, whether it be from an injury or a bye week or something. And if you're not in the waiver wire, then or if you're not like high up on the list, then you could end up getting handcuffed and pretty screwed going into the matchup.
Yeah, very true. So word to the wise of just checking in and those who are don't just look that week that you're in. Try to look a couple weeks ahead, or to your point, when you have bye weeks coming up, especially for those positions where you only have one team for a defense that you can play. It's not like your flex spots where I can play a running back, or I can play a receiver, or I can play a tight end. It's not one of those spots where you might have multiple options already on your bench. So yeah, you got to kind of look towards that. But we got some really good matchups coming up. A big time matchup between you and Allison, a third place game between some rivals of Andy and Zach coming. So we're excited for that. And for those of us who are no longer in it, let's keep playing like we are. Like I said, good to keep your mind right and keep your mind focusing on football. We will have a another podcast next week because that kind of wraps up our championship matchup and giving some kudos there. But what I would like to do, if I can, is we may postpone it slightly, and here's why, everybody. I would love to get everybody on kind of a final podcast and do kind of an award show type podcast. So my ask to the league right now is think about maybe some awards that you might like to see. So it could be, you know, best GM, at that point, right? Like who made the best transactions and whatnot. It doesn't mean that their team won, but it could mean that you saw like they made a lot of good moves that ended up working out in the end, or picked up players that were put on the garbage heap that they thought were good and turned out, stuff like that. It could be based on players. Who was the most overhyped player that didn't turn out well, or vice versa? Who was you know, the guy that you didn't even think about during the season that all of a sudden, took off for us? So I'd love to do kind of an award show style thing. So think about what's up.
Biggest trade swindler, best like waiver wire pickups, who like pissed you off the most this year, snagging guys before you, stuff like that. There's tons of ways to go with this. So
yeah. So I'd like to do something along those lines. And thank you for bringing some of those up. I think those are really cool ones that could be a lot of fun. I'd love to get 10 awards out there, something along those lines, or figure something out. I think it'd just be a lot of fun and a cool thing to do, and then getting everybody on. And so what that would mean is I'd also like to know what are the best days or nights to do it. So for a lot of us, it might be during the weekends or the better times, to actually do the podcast or to do something big like that. I think it'd be a lot of fun. So that's kind of what I would like to do to wrap this whole thing up for the year. We won't go into league changes quite yet. I think we got to kind of simmer on it, think about what's going on with it. But we will do another maybe Zoom call in general. Won't be a podcast, but like a Zoom call or something at some point next year to discuss that. Like, hey, what did you like about the league? What do you want to keep? We used to do something in my training classes that I'd host of, more of, less of, same of. So I think that's one of the ways that I'd probably go about it, is setting up a more of, less of, same of type of deal to say, do you want more points to be awarded for this scoring thing? Do you want less points awarded for this? Do you want, more time to do trades? Do you want less time to do trades? All that kind of stuff. So other things to think about. We'll do it at a future time. But yes, please send in your submissions for what you think would be cool awards for us to do. And I would say let's get those in before by the weekend, so by the first of the year. And why I say that is once we have award submissions, I'd like to pick out what we're going to do and then send them back out to say, hey, here are the 10 awards we're going to have. I'd like your vote. Who did that the best? What player is it? And then kind of tally it up that way to see who we could put in for those awards at that point. Sound good?
And for all, for the rest of the family, this is Allison's first year. We're glad she made it to the finals. But, if you want to give her advice, go ahead and just throw it all in the chat. Which quarterback should she start? Should she pick up somebody off the way? I mean, I'm sure she would love all the advice. So if you guys want to just throw all your opinions in there, really get her mind working to think what she should do, feel free to do that, okay?
Oh, that's true. That's very true. The analysis paralysis, as Andy would say, because that does happen. Love to see
all the opinions from everybody on what she should do for quarterbacks, all that fun stuff. So make sure you help her out a little bit this week and really give us stuff to think about.
Well, thank you for that advice, and thank you for helping me out on today's podcast. It was nice having someone else. I know you've done it before, but Andy and Zach, they like to hoard this stuff, man. I mean, they're just pounding me for, hey, can I hop on? Can I hop on? Can I hop on? And I just keep having to tell them, fine, I guess you can do it. But yeah, but in all honesty, good to have you on. I appreciate it a lot. Good luck this week in the championship matchup. And I'm sure that we will talk at some point before that. And as you said, get these comments rolling. Good luck to Andy and Zach for the third place battle as well. Don't want to leave that out. There is still a battle out there for that. So good luck to you all, and everyone have an enjoyable New Year's. Be safe out there. And I hope to see you all on the final podcast here in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. All right.
Good luck, everyone.
All right. Much love. Bye.
See ya.